used in emerging market to de-risk agricultural value chain and stimulate agricultural lending while protecting smallholder farmer. However, in Africa, we have a marginal proportion of smallholders that have access to insurance cover. And this is a serious challenge. The purpose of this webinar is just to tell us how we can really de-risk, use agriculture insurance to de-risk finance for agriculture on the continent. We hope that the technology that is used by Agritask for the operation will really help to enhance the value proposition for agricultural insurance in Africa. We are delighted to have a good expert with practical experience on the topic that will share some insight with us today. Next slide, please. Hello, next slide. Okay, this is the outline of our presentation for today. We start with some housekeeping. We will then talk about making finance, introduce the panelists, the presentation before moving to the conclusion. Next slide. Okay, on housekeeping, just to tell you that the session for today will last for around 1 hour. To ensure a good quality of this experience, all participants will be unmuted. You have a Q&A or a chat box to send your questions. That is just on the bottom of your screen. You can send your questions at any time. And if you really want to speak, maybe you can raise your hand. There's an icon there which you raise hand, and then we will unmute your microphone. Slide and recording of this presentation will be circulated after we conclude the webinar. You can send your message to the organizer. And finally, we will have a survey that will pop up at the end of the sessions, and we'll really invite you to fill in this survey. Next slide, please. Okay, I will just give some highlight on Making Finance Work for Africa, your host of today. Making Finance Work for Africa is a G8 initiative launched in October 2007. It's a common platform for the harmonization and facilitation of financial sector development, and we bring together development partner, African government, and private sector to really unleash the potentials of African financial sector in order to achieve some of the broad goals that are economic development and poverty reduction on the continent. Next slide. We work around 3 thematic major strategic area, priority that are financial inclusion, long-term finance, financial stability and governance. And under these 3 strategic pillars, we have a number of thematic like digital finance, agricultural finance, SME finance, insurance. But on long-term finance, we have some work on institutional investors, and we have an initiative from the African Long-Term Finance Initiative. Finally, on the financial stability and governance, we have a community of African banking supervisor with the central banks, which mandate really to promote and enhance supervisory practice on the continent. Knowledge management advocacy is a cross-cutting pillar. Next slide. We would like to really express our gratitude to our funding partner, the African Development Bank, the German corporations, the French Development Agency, European Union, African banks, and the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Without their contribution, we will not be able really to operate. We thank them for their generous support and continued support to Making Finance Work for Africa. I would like now move to the panelists. The webinar of today will be moderated by Mr. Thomas Vicker. Thomas Vicker is an assistant director at FSD Africa. He's assistant director of risk. FSD Africa is actually a UK-funded program with the mandate to transform financial sector, financial market across Africa. We are pleased really to host also the presenter from two presenters that they will be introduced from Agritask. Agritask is an agri-tech company headquartered in Israel, Tel Aviv, and they provide holistic agri-operation platform for various agricultural stakeholders, with crop insurance being one of the most important segments in the operations. So I will not give more detail about them. I will leave the moderator already to present them further. With that, I pass the microphone to Mr. Thomas Rieke, our moderator today. Thomas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Hugues. So it's a big pleasure for me to be moderating this webinar. Before we go right into the presentation by Agritask, let me say a few words about why I am so thrilled that this webinar is happening. So FSD Africa, as Hugues said, we're funded by the UK government, specialists. We are a specialist development agency focusing exclusively on the financial sector in sub-Saharan Africa. And the reason why we think that is important and why the UK government thinks that is important is because the financial markets are very much the foundation of a thriving economy and businesses. And as we all know, agriculture and the rural sector are a big part of economies and societies in Africa. Agritask is, and you will hear much more details about Agritask from the people themselves, but Agritask is a technology company that provides an operations platform for the agricultural sector. And this is potentially resolving a big problem that I've seen in my work on agriculture insurance in Africa. And the problem is that there is very little transparency and visibility of what is actually happening on the ground. This may be true. I mean, you have a bit of transparency with large commercial farming operations, but certainly not with smallholder agriculture in Africa. I've seen data records of yield data where for the last 5 years or 10 years, the yield per hectare is essentially the same figure because nobody really knows or did any measurement. And it was just an estimate that, oh yeah, last year was as good as the year before, so let's just put the same figure. This intransparency is really stopping financial services providers, including insurers, from going into that market, yeah, apart from a few pilots or innovation projects that we've seen. And if there would be a platform and a database and a structured data availability that would give insurers, in this case, the confidence that the data that they are being presented with is reliable, is robust, then that would make it possible for insurers to design and provide commercially sustainable products at a very large scale. So with that little bit of background, I'm going to hand over to the panelists from Agritask. As Hugues said, Agritask is being represented by Rom Aviv, who's the managing director and head of insurance at Agritask. And he's joined by Einau Gold, who is an insurance product director. We will have about, 20, 25 slides or so. So this should take us about half an hour or so. And then, as Hugues said, Q&A is very much open. So please use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask your questions. I will then take these questions and post them to the panelists. All right, let's go.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining today. It's an absolute pleasure and privilege to share our views on crop insurance in Africa, discuss the challenges faced in this ecosystem, and lastly, also offer our perspective on possible solutions and the available business opportunities. So before really starting, I would like to convey our gratitude to the Making Finance Work for Africa platform for the invitation, and also to FSD Africa for hosting it and for the ongoing support and fruitful collaboration. Next slide, please. So, sorry, previous slide, please. Yes, thanks. So prior to discussing the agenda, I would like to briefly introduce my organization, Agritask. We are predominantly a business-to-business software company that was established in 2010, really as a response to the growing demand of technological advancements in agricultural operations. In the last decade, we managed to grow to a multidisciplinary team of 80 professionals with background in agronomical sciences, software developer, GIS, finance, actuarial, and data sciences. We're headquartered in Tel Aviv with a software development office in Sofia and a business development center in Brazil. At the moment, we have a diversified portfolio of 60 businesses that are our clients, and they operate in a variety of segments across more than 30 countries and 5 continents. That would include food and beverage companies, farm input companies, and lastly, obviously, financial services entities such as insurers, and Africa is being a core geography for our business. Whilst we are really a private for-profit business, the nature of our operations is highly associated with social impact and the enhancement of standard of living in emerging markets. In this context, we have obtained a significant investment from the German government through the Insure Resilience vehicle around 1.5 years ago. Next slide, please. And really aligned with our key stakeholders, our business model, mandate, and the entire aspiration includes the ambition to improve insurance inclusivity and empowerment of livelihood of smallholder farmers globally. We strive to operate worldwide, yet overcome local obstacles that may differ from one place to another. And as an illustration to our footprint, you can know that we are very active in Central and South America. And these days, we are very rapidly expanding our business in Africa. What we envision really is that in a matter of several years, our platform will be servicing either explicitly or implicitly and benefiting millions of smallholder scale farmers globally. Next slide, please. And the focus of the presentation today is technology, or specifically remote sensing and digitization in crop insurance. So the agenda is really split into 3 main components. Firstly, I will briefly guide you through the key risks in the African continent concerned with agricultural production and actually insufficient availability of financial risk transfer mechanisms such as insurance. And then Einav Gold, our insurance product director, will share with you some of our tools, as well as other tools that are available in this industry that essentially address those key problems. Specifically, we will guide you through the technological solutions that resolve key challenges in the context of insurance policy life cycle management, from the onboarding part of the growers and the scalability aspects to policy risk monitoring, and lastly, the payouts of the claims and the loss adjustments. In the last part, we will offer a vision towards some scalable frameworks that we believe could be viable in the African crop insurance ecosystem. So next slide, please. So now turning really to the problem, or one of the key problems that is a starting point and is quite an evident risk factor. What you see in this slide is really 2 exhibits that show you spatially some of the underlying projections of increased temperatures in the African continent. The upper one is a very interesting exhibit showing the percentage of a decade that will be featuring droughts. So meaning how many years out of 10 will be featuring droughts now and in 30 years from now. And you see obviously a significant upward trend. And the second one is obviously related to the first one, showing that projections in terms of temperature and per area are not showing very negative signal either. As you can understand, if this phenomena, they all hold true, evidently there's going to be an increase in the risk and impairment of agricultural production. So next slide, please. Now the relationship between what can happen, not necessarily in terms of temperature, but generally in terms of climatic hazards and their impact on crops, as you can see here, and you see here a very radical example of 5 degrees of Celsius increase, which is substantial and can be experienced during drought context. Depending on what crop you're concerned with, whether this is maize, rice, wheat, or soy, the yield production can decrease by any figure from 20% to 150%. Next slide, please. So what do you do about this financially? You know that climate is changing, it may affect crops. So given this anticipated phenomenon, it becomes clear that financial risk mitigation and transfer techniques are really required to protect and hedge the livelihoods of the hundreds of millions of smallholder farmers. And what you see here is a significant protection gap. It's perhaps a nowadays penetration levels across the continent, but unfortunately, not a lot has changed. So just reflecting that there is more to be done in the next 5 years, which is the horizon back of that slide. And also, we believe that it serves as a commercial opportunity. So really summarizing very briefly, smallholder farmers' food security, livelihood, and stability is vulnerable as a result of risk factors such as climate change. And obviously that's amplified by insufficient insurance. On the other hand, for insurers and more broadly financial services institutes, the key pain points include historical data to build solid products, distribution channels, lack of understanding of the product by the consumers, and perception of high risk due to climate change. What we believe is that technology is a significant enabler that can assist with the operations, their scalability, and the risk underwriting. Next slide, please. So the rest of the presentation will be very soon led by Einav, and she will present to you our views and the solutions to some of the problems that I've just mentioned. Just to very quickly put the scene, establish the scene for that, this is a preliminary overview of broadly crop insurance products that are available. And there are typically 2 categories: the indemnity products, which are traditional policies that indemnify insureds according to the exact loss that they experience, with one key disadvantage in the context of smallholder farmers is the operational costs. The cost to onboard thousands, 10,000s, or 100,000s of smallholder farmers, and they execute the claim management process that also includes a moral hazard due to lack of visibility. The second category is index products, which are essentially weather derivatives or area yield index instruments that provide a payout to the insureds based on the criteria that is only implicitly linked to them. For instance, if you had a drought in an area, but the farmer did not have any losses, the farmer may get a payout regardless of his or her losses, and vice versa. So now I'm really handing over to the floor to Einav, and she will lead you through the rest of the presentation and show to you how technology can be utilized to mitigate some of those issues.
Thank you, Ron. Next slide. Okay, great. As Ron was saying, the idea is to go through concrete examples of different technologies and tools that are existing already in the market. We have classified the tools that we will see later on the following categories. So we have the onboarding tools that really aim to know who grows what and where. And this is a key important point to understand what is the risk that is being insured. We will show you also tools of mobile applications that help with the digitization of all the data collection when we talk about data collection from the field, and even help on the execution and planning of these tasks. Also, like going through, we will go through some tools of remote sensing that really allows us to monitor and get information from the farmers really from the distance without needing really to be in the field. And we can provide this information throughout the whole season, which really brings a lot of visibility of what is happening on the farm level. One point to note of the previous categories, they are very focused on how we collect relevant information and what's the quality of this data. But there is a really important point here to mention is that it's not only about gathering data and having the information, but also, I think Thomas was mentioning before, about visibility. So it's important here also not only to think about how we get information, but also about platforms, for example, like Agritask, that put together all the information in one platform. First of all, to allow visibility and aggregate the information, but also to allow really enable a full operations workflow. So it's not only about having the information for taking decisions, but also be able to have all the tools to be able to operate an agriculture insurance scheme in Africa. Next slide, please. So we will start now with some of the tools of the onboarding. The main goal of these tools is to improve the process, but making it scalable and making it scalable through digitization. So we have today like great job performed by aggregators, cooperatives, NGOs, government to collect information. Sometimes this information it's not complete, or it's missing some relevant information for performing risk analysis and allowing to have insurance. So what we'll show today is like that there are possibilities of technologies that enable the scalability to have mass registration of small farmers like we have in Africa, and also give them tools to integrate with different systems that will, like the end all is to give formalization to informal markets and allow them to have access to different services like insurance and also farmers. We will focus on this part today, but we do believe that this is not the end part of how to improve the insurance scheme on the onboarding part. We see that in the future, farmers will be much more empowered, and the technologies that we will show you today could be used in the future also by farmers. For example, when we talk about the onboarding, like self-registration. Of course, this comes together with a bigger market penetration of smartphones and access to internet. But we believe that this is also like the next step to go. So next slide, please. So now going much more concrete and in some specific examples, what you see here now is one of the mobile forms that can help to onboard farmers. It means to collect any information that goes from the farmer to the insured crop, insured area, the type of insurance that we are trying to provide. It's important to mark here that these mobile tools like Agritask, they do not need internet in the field to collect the information. They do work with GPS, which allows to collect the exact location of the farmer is. So we mentioned before about the data quality and the data that we receive. This really helps to improve the location of the farmers and even get the plot boundaries. So what you see on the right side of the screen is really the ability to know where we are standing on the map and draw the full limits of the farm. And this allows us to have a much more precise location of the farmers, which allows to have a much more precise risk analysis. Because if we know that the data is the location of the farmers, it's not really good. So it might help, might affect on how we currently analyze the risk and price and the different policies. Next slide. So it's not only about onboarding farmers, but making it in a very scalable way. And I mentioned before that there is already information that aggregators, cooperatives already have about farmers. So there is no need to start from scratch. If you consider that this information already exists, so we can complement the previous tools of the mobile, of gather information from the field with information that we already have. It's possible to import all this data, like mass import it into the system, but also today platforms have open APIs to connect different systems through web services to make this flow of information between the systems automatic. But it's not only about how we collect the information, the initial information of the farmers and the initial information of the plots to be insured, but also on this onboarding process to have it full. There is also a possibility to integrate with other systems, with other institutions, and also with fintech companies, for example. If we think about small farmers in Africa, sometimes they don't have, for example, bank accounts. And this onboarding process allows to integrate, for example, with an e-wallet provider that based on the information that we collect from the field, we can give this information for them to open the wallet accounts and enable them to access to insurers and also for loans. Next slide. Great. What you see here is clusterization of a country. In this case, we see it in Nigeria, where the idea here is to be able to group different farmers in a homogeneous groups based on different risk parameters. Like, for example, historical weather information, agriculture aptitude, soil taxonomy, anything that can really affect the outcome and the productivity of the farmers. So by analyzing the whole country and grouping in clusters different growers according to their location, we are able to analyze have a pricing analysis that it's really scalable. So whenever we have a new farmer on board, we really can understand what's the risk that this farmer has and what should be the service that we provide to them. Next slide. So once we have the farmers on board in the system and we issue a policy, we'll start monitoring the policies and the portfolio. Today, without remote sensing tools, it's very hard to know what is happening on the field. In general, today, we work with a lot of in-season inspections, like visits to the farmers that we do physically. But it's if we think of Africa, where farmers are very scattered and are small-scale farmers, it's really like high cost and not very time efficient. So we do believe that adding satellite images, weather information, and use it to create agronomic models will help make it scalable and giving much more visibility during the season and covering the whole country. And we can use this to create, for example, early warning systems to really identify the areas with any problem. And again, like in the future, and like what we see is that having a platform and having integrated all the information in one place, what we are really doing is we're creating a database that enables to collect information. For example, collecting information from now on of yield information. And this will really help building in the future better and more accurate yield estimation models. So today, I think this is a very hot topic and everyone wants to have like these yield estimations models, but they are very crop specific, very location specific, and they really rely on historical information that sometimes we really miss. So the idea is to really be able in the future, once we have more information and we start collecting better data, to be able to have yield estimations models that can be also used for crop risk monitoring. Next slide. But now, yes, getting in concrete examples related to the crop risk monitoring. One of the examples today is that we are able to use satellite images and radar images to really monitor the crop growth. Some of you may be familiar with this. It's what you see now, it's an NDVI. This is normalized difference vegetation index that determines the density of green content in a specific area based on how plants reflect the light. So the index goes from -1 to 1, being -1 without any vegetation at all in the area, to 1 where we have very high vegetation. And what we see here in the curve is really the crop growth of the plant, where we can see from the beginning of the season to the end of the season how the crop, the evolution of the crop. And it allows to monitor remotely this crop growth and detect any anomalies in the growth curve from the normal value. So if we will see a sudden drop in this curve, so we can identify that that might be an indicator of damage on the crop. It's not only used for monitoring this NDVI information. You will see that it's used for a lot of things, and it can even help to have, for example, historical NDVI, historical information, and we have 20 years of information that are available according to different satellites, but we have historical information that can be used to combine, for example, with weather information that we will see in a couple of minutes, to improve, for example, policy design by understanding the correlation between, for example, what Ron was saying before of high temperature and how it affects the crop growth. Next slide, please. So how we can use these satellite images not only for following the crop growth, but also if we combine this with agronomic knowledge, and it's possible to have different types of risks. This is one of the risks that I wanted to show you today, that it's the planting risk. What we can do is, based on the crop growth, identify when it's the planting date of a specific location. So if we combine this with the planting windows, understanding planting windows of like the optimal moment to make the planting for the best crop development. So we can combine all these tools to really detect when a plot was planted, when was it planted, and based on when it was planted, understand if there is higher risk or less risk. And this is what you see on with the different colors. So we really can identify which are the growers that have higher risk, and also knowing the planting date to be able to monitor the different phenostages of the crop. Next slide. So I mentioned before that we still don't have the magic formula for getting really the yield estimation for every crop in every place as like a tons per hectare or kilograms per hectare. But there is still some indicators of yield that we can analyze based on these remote sensing tools. So what we can understand is understand the history of a specific area, understand what are the highest potential and the highest capacity of an area, and really classify the different farmers and the different plots based on comparing what are the values of vegetation of this year compared to the history and the maximum potential. So we really can see which are the growers that have higher potential and lower potential, even when they are in the same area with the same homogeneous conditions, if we go back to what I mentioned before of clusterization. So we really can classify each one of them. And this is what we see here with different colors, and we can use it like street lights to really identify which are the most problematic areas. And we can really compare this information and combine all of these risks together. Next slide. And then moving from the satellite images to weather data, there are multiple sources of data covering, for example, Africa. This is just an example of precipitation. We have sources like TAMSAT, like R2, like CHIRPS. They really have data since 1983, 1991, depending the case. And this is a very valuable source of information that we can use for better making risk analysis and monitoring throughout the season. So how we actually use this information, next slide, sorry. So how we use this information is that we will input to the system both the historical information and the ongoing information. For example, I will take this example of precipitation and we will focus on drought. I think it's a very known problem in Africa, the drought. So what we have here on the left side of the screen, if you follow me, so we have a model that basically compares in red the normal average for a specific period, considering all the historical information, and we will do it based on each specific location. Okay, so we will do it based on villages, or even also we can do it much better based on the clusters, that the homogeneous clusters that we mentioned before. So what we do is we can compare the current values of accumulated precipitation for a specific period compared with this normal value that was also calculated for the area, and really understand the difference to identify if there is any risk, for example, of drought. And any risk of indication of drought can also, it's also an indicator of crop damage. So we can really cross-check, for example, if we are in indemnity products, we can really cross-check the information with the claims, or even check with weather information, and understand like if there is a real risk in a specific area. And we can create, based on these alerts and an early warning system, to notify farmers, and it can really be used as a way of communication with cooperatives and farmers and any other stakeholder in the scheme. Next slide. So moving for something that it's more related to index insurance, when we use this, for example, taking again the example of the drought, we define based on the historical values a threshold that will be the one that define if there is a payout or there is not a payout. So there are tools that will bring a lot of transparency to the information and transparency to how we operate the insurance. And one option is to have really showing every month or every specific period of time what is the contract position compared to thresholds. So, so what this means is that we can really define thresholds, and you see it here in red and in yellow, based on the, and we see in blue how we are getting throughout the season when the crop is growing. We are getting closer and closer, and see really how far we are, because how far we are will depend if we need to pay to farmers or we don't need to pay to them. Next slide. Okay, so we talked about how we onboard farmers into the system. We talked about how we can throughout the season monitor and see what's happening. And now I will move to claim management. Sorry. So technological tools can really help with the systemization of the process and make it less arbitrary in order to reduce moral hazard. So the technological tools that I will show you in a minute really can help make the process much more standardized in the way that we gather information. And this will, first of all, allow to introduce best practices of how we gather information and how we collect it, and also improve the quality of the data that we are using, because this is the data that we will use for like future years to analyze the risk and define thresholds. And also systemization of the process can really reduce the time between the moment we have a claim to the moment that the farmer gets paid. And this can really help building resilience in the farmers. As in the same sense as we saw in onboarding, we do believe in this claim management that the farmers will get more and more active, will have a more active role in the future, being able to access such tools to also report themselves some of the information. Next slide. So we have tools for claim notification, and going back to all this possibility to digitalize any type of protocol and any type of inspection that we want to collect from the field. So we have ability to give access to brokers, to aggregators, to cooperatives, even to farmers, to notify the insurance companies of an existing damage. So here it's a very simple, just as an example of how we can report what's the cause of the damage, report the date of the event, to be able to compare with the information we have from remote sensing, and also select if it's affecting one plot, several plots. If we talk of microinsurance, we can even select growers if it's necessary. And then what the insurance company will receive is actually a visibility of really where are the areas that have claims. In each point, we will see really what's the cause of the claim, and also like the date of this claim. So be able to really understand when this happened. So next slide. So it's not only about noticing when there is a claim, but also giving the ability to the insurance companies to, once we have a claim, to really have a digitalized process of inspection. So what we can do is that we will, based on the claim notification here, you see the red point on the left side of my screen, we can combine it, for example, with remote sensing tools. For example, like the NDVI, the Vegetation Index, really see the areas that were damaged. So we can even get to the point where we can define which areas can be, should be sampled to get information of the damage, of the loss. But even if we don't want to define the path that the inspector should go, we can at least plan when and plan who needs to go to each farmers and which farmers needs to be visited. Once we plan this, the inspector will receive this, the loss adjuster will receive this in the phone, will be notified that there is a new task planned for him, and he can really go and execute the task. And the insurance company can later on monitor on what was done in the field. So because the mobile phone works with GPS, so we can know exactly the location of where the points were taken, and we really can follow up on where the samples were taken, verify that it was taken from the exact farmers, and knowing the exact information. Next slide, sorry. So continuing with these claims, there is a possibility to digitalize any type of field protocol. Anything that today it's filled with paper and a pen, we can automate into a mobile application. So why we want to digitalize this is because we want to reduce human error when we are writing, when we're making calculations. We want to restrict what are the options that can be selected, to here bring, again, best practices, really help guiding the person that is collecting the data from the field of how he has to collect this data step by step. And really, by digitalizing the process, like, we avoid processing time. So you collect information only once, and that's it. There is no need to collect it and then pass it to an Excel and then process it and aggregate it. So all this is done directly in the system once we collect the information directly from the phone. Next slide. And focusing now on index insurance, where we don't have so many field inspections, but what we will do is that we can use the information that we are gathering. For example, if we continue with this drought example, not only to monitor if there is any indication of damage and loss, but once we have an index insurance and we define the thresholds for each policy, all the payouts calculations will be done automatically. So what we see here is that we have in black the cumulative rainfall of the current period. We have in orange the normal rainfall based, again, on the historical information. But what we add here in comparison to the previous model is that we really have the payout calculation based on percentage of the sum insured. So all this process will be completely automatically based on the information we are getting, for example, in this case, from weather stations. Next slide. Just to conclude, and we talked about a lot of tools of different processes, and we really wanted to bring you all these tools together in one specific use case. We'll talk about area yield index, and it's a very common product in Africa. For those of you who are not completely familiar with this product, so very short explanation. So in general, how it works is that it's an index insurance. So thresholds are defined based on historical yield data, the available historical yield data that we have. And what we do throughout the season is, like what we do once at the end of the season, is that to enable to define the damage and identify which farmers need to be paid. So there's some crop cutting experiments performed. So we take random samples of farmers, and based on, and we will go there and make an yield assessment. We will measure the yield on the field, and based on that data, we will extrapolate these values to the rest of the farmers. So when we're talking about Africa, we have a lot of farmers very scattered. So this is a very good solution to make it scalable and operational. But what we want to do here is to really improve this situation where we are taking samples very randomly. So if we analyze all the tools that we talked today, and I know there were a lot, and yeah, and very, very fast. So we can start with the onboarding of farmers, and using the onboarding tools that we defined before to really get the location and the plot boundaries. We want the plot boundaries because based on this information, we will analyze satellite images and really get the vegetation and the crop growth. So we will start with mobile tools to get the plot boundaries, and we will follow up with the risk clusterization to really be able to have an enabled profiling of farmers, to be able to classify them and understand that they have the same risk profile. We will then on the monitoring side could have the NDVI monitoring and yield potential. We want this to be able to define sampling groups, not only for monitoring, but also because I said before that in area index, sometimes we take random samples of which are the farmers that we will visit. So what we say here is if we have a group of farmers in the same cluster, so the profile is the same and it's homogeneous, but we see very different results on the yield. So we can really make groups to take samples that statistically represent each group of farmers inside of a specific cluster. So what we will do is based on these groups, we can really create a process, a methodical process using planning tools like the ones we said, like we can plan when to go and where, and choose farmers of each group to be sampled. So then when we receive these inspections, we will go to the farm to measure the yield, and we will do it following best practices and ensure the quality of the data. Once we calculate the index to extrapolate to all the farmers and understand which farmers need to be paid, so we can get a much more precise calculation and a calculation that represents much closer the reality of the farmers, considering that we didn't take random samples. For example, we didn't take all the bad farmers, or we didn't take only the good farmers. So we really here bring transparency and objectivity to the way that we are calculating the damage. It's just a way of that we believe on this area yield index using the different tools that we showed you today. So I'll give it back to you, Rom, for final words.
Thanks very much, Einav. So we're very limited on time, so I'll just take a very quick step beyond the boundaries of this this discussion, namely technology and what enables, and add just 2 comments. Apart from technology, which is a key enabler in the African crop insurance ecosystem, what's vital and necessary is a fruitful collaboration between the various stakeholders that would include aggregators such as input companies and microfinance institutions, the governmental entities, help from agencies, NGOs, and development institutions, and obviously technologists like ourselves. And the second item is really education. Insurance is not broadly understood, and more precisely its benefits. So significant investment into that will yield the required return, which is both commercial, we believe, and secondly also impact and the social benefits. So with that, we'll ramp up our presentation.
Thank you very much, Rom and Einav. Good. So there's a number of questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much for that. I will try to cluster these a little bit. There's a couple of questions about the data itself, yeah, the availability and quality of data. So Francis Hippolyte Gemese, for example, is asking whether remote sensing can help to detect and monitor groundwater availability. So I know, Einav and Rom, you've talked a lot about weather data or precipitation data, as well as yield data. But of course, there's other factors that determine how well a crop is growing or not. And I know that there have been some efforts to capture soil data or soil moisture data, which is, at least for me as a non-agronomist, somewhat related to groundwater availability. Bruno Le Poivre is asking about NDVI and its limitations, yeah, despite, of course, the obvious advantages that you mentioned, and whether there is alternative data and improved data, such as biophysical indices that you can use. So the question, I guess, here is what other data is available or is becoming available in terms of remote sensing data, and how useful will that be for the purpose of structuring insurance? Can you give us an impression of that? Let's start with this question.
Yeah, I'll start if you want, Rom. You can add if I miss something. So as you were saying, soil moisture is definitely data that is coming more and more available. Other data that sometimes it's relevant, for example, could be evapotranspiration. Other things that are important, for example, is agriculture aptitude information, soil taxonomy, and some of this information, inland water, for example. So some of this information is already available, or there are also providers that can collaborate on that. And going back to this integration of a platform to integrate different data sources. Regarding NDVI, so the NDVI is just an index. So the limitations sometimes come more on the source of the satellite images. Just for you to know, like images are dependent on availability of when the satellite goes. So sometimes we have between 5 to 10 days of availability. It also depends on clouds. So if we have clouds, this information that we wouldn't take because it affects the calculation. So it seems like there is no vegetation. But technology is improving, and there are other ways of calculating this index. For example, with radar images instead of satellite images. So that's one of the options for the limitations. I think you mentioned something about physical observations that can improve. We believe in this combination of different data sources, and I think any type of information that can be collected physically can improve any model and make it much more precise. For that, we have the mobile application that can introduce any type of field protocol to collect information. Even we have projects of soil sampling. We can gather information of quality and any type of field protocol that can be done. So there are other data sources besides the one that we talked today that we think are the most relevant for today. And there are limitations that technology is overcoming also every time. I don't know, Romy, if you have other opinion, you wanted to add something else.
Can I add a quick follow-up, and Ron, maybe you can speak to that then. So about the data. So Lynn in the chat has been asking about historical weather information, and obviously density of weather stations was a problem historically. Now with remote sensing, that of course has changed. I want to add to that the question about granularity of the data available. Yeah, so both spatially as well as I mean time frame or intervals, and then of course Lynn's questions about how far back does this data go.
Yeah, I can take that. So it depends on the required level of resolution. There are different sources of data. Some of them go back as far as 30 years ago, obviously with less favorable resolution. That said, there are also more modern techniques that essentially, if you like, interpolate or extrapolate depending on the context between weather stations or information at a particular area that gives further insights with regards to data associated with pixels or grids that were not originally part of the data set. So that's, we believe, a first step towards more granular structured data sources. It shall be improving in the next years, because also those statistical techniques improve as time goes by, as it's possible to better and better calibrate the methods. But also it's important to know that generally speaking, the index insurance solution is typically tackling a large variety of farmers, with basis risk being a key component. We believe that with ground data collection combined with satellite, as well as some extrapolations of, if you like, weather data, and will ultimately yield also to better insurance products.
Okay, there have been a couple of questions in the chat about locations or countries in Africa where you see this happening, or where you could see this happening. So Francis is particularly interested in Cote d'Ivoire. I think it was Bruno who asked about Senegal. I personally do know that in Kenya, both the livestock insurance program as well as the crop insurance program is using satellite-based NDVI data, if I'm not mistaken. I know of a couple of initiatives in Nigeria, but obviously, as you've said, Africa or insurers in Africa are quite at the beginning for this. I want to add to that a question about what's the role of governments or public sector and maybe donors in this.
Sure. Right. If you look at, if you compare the overall crop insurance in Africa, as far as smallholder farmers would be concerned, is a startup for any organization. And given the macroeconomic situation in various places, the affordability of those products and also the potential profitability, in many cases, it is really a necessity, or actually partnerships with governments or partnerships with donors or other sort of funding providers is a necessity and can be looked at as an initial investment, and the follow-up question is, what's the return on this investment, both the social return as well as the commercial return for the for the various stakeholders. So the first item that those entities can and they're helping with is really the provision of funding to build the capacity, the intellectual capacity, but then also to deploy the solution, whether this is by helping in providing support for premium, or whether this is by helping organizations getting the know-how. However, in our expectations and in terms of our plans, obviously we view this projects not as one-offs, and we're always concerned with the scalability of those, meaning that at the end of the day, we don't want to have as a deliverable only a report that describes what has been done, but what we want is hopefully to help growing and establishing an ecosystem, and a donor capital in this context, or agencies, is really a necessity. That's the first item. The second item is really, we think that, and it is happening, that also the intellectual capacity can be also not only financed by potential donors, but also provided to a certain extent as time goes by and expertise is being developed.
Rom, are there particular countries you have in mind in Africa? I mean, where you see favorable conditions, I mean, either from data availability or interest of the insurance industry or interest of the government? I mean, I've seen that I think you have a partnership in Nigeria with an insurer. You recently did one with Continental Reinsurance, which is a Pan-African reinsurance company. Yeah. What's your view?
Yes, that's true. We're active in Nigeria, in Mozambique, but also we are seeing a general, not revival, but a general interest from really across the board of many African continents, from various types of actors and players. I mean, technologically, we feel that we're quite agnostic and can operate in especially as far as satellite technology is concerned. But in terms of the willingness, we have to say we're very active in Nigeria. We see a lot of quite a vibrant environment in Kenya as well. But that's kind of being extrapolated in other areas, even in small countries. For instance, now we're exploring some very interesting project in Botswana, where we are also in the midst of attracting an irrigation system provider, i.e. because we would like to see how they can support risk reduction and also making insurance more affordable as a result of this risk reduction and enhancing the inclusivity.
There is, let me take one last question. I think there's a particularly interesting one from Claude in the chat. So Claude Torre is essentially asking about what type of for what crops is that approach that you presented useful? Yeah? Is it what about tree crops or sorry? Are there any ongoing experiences in certain countries or value chains in sub-Saharan Africa? What's your experience with what types of crops are particularly favorable for this approach? Where does it maybe not work very well?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Einav, would you like to tackle it?
Yeah.
Or do you want to?
Yeah. So in terms of Agritask, so we are crop agnostic. I think also Rom mentioned before. When it comes to different crops, so I think all the tools that we showed today are very much applicable to all the crops. The main difference that we see today is that some crops may need to have the same information, like high resolution images when it comes to satellite, for example. But when we talk about digitization, when we talk about monitoring, all these tools are very much crop agnostic. The only point where I see here that we should consider the difference between, for example, fruit crops or forestry or orchards, for example. So that's the main difference, but it's still, all these tools are very much adaptable to any type of crop.
All right, good. Thank you very much, Rom and Einav. I'll hand back to Hugues for some closing words.
Yes, thank you very much, Thomas. It was really a very enlightening presentations. It also shows how very complex is this subject of agricultural insurance, from product design to claim monitoring, paying, payout, and so on. It's quite complex, and we are very pleased to see how technology can really help to enhance the value proposition, not only for agricultural insurers, insurance company, but also to make it insurance more inclusive in the way that it can become affordable to some of our smallholder or what we can call commercial agricultural enterprises, the agricultural SMEs, at least if they can really afford to get agricultural insurance coverage, that will always be a breakthrough on our continent. We know it's a product that's really lacking. So on that, I would really thank, first of all, the presenter for their very insightful presentations. We learned a lot. That was possible because we also had a very good moderator. I want to thank the moderator, Joey Thomas, for the excellent job. We could not cover all the topic. Time is not on our side. All the questions, time is not on our side. But I'm sure that we will, the presenter will make sure that they can follow up with some of the on some of the questions. I think we will channel them through to them, and we see how they can respond after this this session. What we can also do is that actually it's actually with Agritask and FSD we plan to see if it's two webinars. We started with this one, but there is a second one that is planned, and maybe that will also answer some of the questions that you are raising here. It will be on the topic of creating data infrastructure for better product design and establishing a crop insurance scheme. So I think maybe some of the questions that you are asking here will better cover on that presentation, and we are still in the preparation phase. I think we'll have that presentation probably somewhere in the course of, in the month of October or November. You will get an email. We would like to thank the participants, all the participants that have made themselves available to join these sessions. It was really a pleasure having you with us. we really invite you to continue monitoring and following Making Finance Work series. On that, I would like to thank you all for joining, for your time. After we wind up the sessions, you have a questionnaire that will pop up automatically on your screen. Please fill in the questionnaires or the segments that give us the feedback, necessary feedback that we want to improve our sessions. On that, I would like to say thank you very much. Have a good day and bye-bye to you.